it is my pleasure to open the panel NATO at 75 and Latvia's and regional experience. I'm also a little bit happy that the ministers are not here. It gives me security because I know that the defense minister is building up military capabilities and our foreign minister in Washington, D.C. is informing allies about our responsibility when it comes to our defense and security affairs and the cooperation, especially along the eastern flank. And I think it is very important, especially considering the new administration in the United States. And they have to be 100% sure we are worthy partners, and the United States cannot work without us in the same way as we cannot work without the American leadership within the Transatlantic Alliance. Today, I have the pleasure to chair a very interesting panel with the godfather of the organization that gave me the first job, Minister's Diplomatic Advisor, Imants Lieģis. I would like to invite you also to join me at a panel. My first job actually took place here when we were organizing the Young Leaders Forum at the Riga NATO Summit. And one of the young leaders was actually Paul Johnson. And it is my pleasure to think that this forum and the ideas that were spread in 2006 made Sweden join NATO very recently. The second speaker I would like to invite is Petr Lunak, who is Deputy Head of Engagement Section at NATO Public Diplomacy Division. In 2006, it was my first report I was writing to NATO Public Diplomacy after the completion of the project. Then my supervisors, project managers taught me how to do, please. And Dr. Adam Eberhardt from the East European Studies Center from the University of Warsaw. I remember Pavel Konzel was the Polish representative at the forum. We spoke about energy security only, mostly. He used to work with the Polish oil and gas company. Now he's working with Chevron, but digital challenges, transformational challenges, which shows how different the oil industry has become these days. NATO at inception was the British initiative because the Brits saw what was happening in Europe. So Ernest Bevin, then the foreign minister, asked the United States to sign the security cooperation with the European countries. Until the sounding of talks in like 1950s, the communist takeover in China, the detection of the second nuclear bomb by the Soviet Union, and also the Korea War. That was the time when Europeans really become responsible towards NATO. We invested after the Marshall Plan reconstruction in military capabilities and security, and then Americans started to call this an organization. Time passed, Cold War. We saw that Warsaw Pact countries couldn't live in peace. There was a partner that was always oppressing their partners. Moscow, when Hungarians wanted to detour from the Stalinist guidelines, Prague Spring, when the Stalinists wanted to take freedoms away from Czechs and Slovaks, and when the Polish workers and Christians started to riot in Poland, Solidarność, to take away all the values again. And those were the instances that we actually debated at this Young Leaders Forum, the experience we want to avoid. 2 decades have passed since the Big Bang enlargement. I would like to give the floor to Imants Lieģis first to explain Latvia, the region, the lessons that we have learned in the past and the way ahead. Imants?
Okay, thanks very much, Sandis, and thanks for referring to your beginnings with another organization called the Latvian Transatlantic organization, which I was involved in. And of course, many of you know that they organized the annual Riga conference. But I would say that this event today, the closing event of the Security Forum, is the intimate version of the Riga conference. So it's a great pleasure for me to be participating. I must say that I have another hat apart from being advisor to the Minister of Defence, and that is I'm also a researcher at the Institute of International Affairs, and so it's a great pleasure for me to be here. So essentially, I want to just say a few words about 3 of the issues that we're looking at. The first is NATO at 75, Latvia's anniversary year, being a member of NATO for 20 years, and then just a few words about looking ahead. So the 75th anniversary, as we know, of NATO was marked in Washington, and it was a muted celebration. It was, of course, muted because of the fact that there's an ongoing war in Europe, the first time that war has returned to European soil for over 70 years, and at the same time, the other side of the coin was that it was a celebration of an enlarged NATO, and there are now 32 members. We recall that when NATO was founded 75 years ago, it was 12 countries that established the alliance. And when I was Latvia's representative to the alliance in the lead up to our joining in 2004, I also remember there was another anniversary summit of NATO in Washington. It was the 50th anniversary, and even at that time there was a war going on in Europe, in the Balkans. So we see that there's a constant of conflicts around Europe. But let's not forget that NATO really has been a resounding success. It's been a resounding success because it has upheld peace and security for all of the members that were part of this defensive alliance. And it's also been successful because of the fact that unity has prevailed within NATO, despite the fact that there are, amongst the various democracies that are member states, there are also differences of opinion, but they are usually overcome. So today we see that the organization really contributes to upholding peace and stability for over 1 billion people on either side of the Atlantic. And I would say that during the course of its enlargement and its existence, NATO has really shown resilience and an ability to adapt to the surrounding circumstances, the global changes that it has faced. And I think we've seen this very much during the last 20 years when we went into NATO. This was post 9/11 and the first attack on a member state of the alliance. Surprisingly, it was the largest member state, the United States of America. And so this resulted in an illustration that Article 5, which is the key clause of the Washington Treaty, which founded NATO, actually came into operation very rapidly. Although Latvia wasn't in the alliance at the time, after the 11th of September 2001, there was immediately that day a NATO council that was called, and on the 12th of on the 12th of September 2001, there was a unanimous decision by NATO to put into place Article 5, the collective defence clause of the alliance. So this illustrated that that NATO really works. And as a result of that, the big debate at the time was that, and we were, of course, the post-disappearance of the Soviet Union, the peace dividends that came out of that during the end of the Cold War. We were in this period where NATO was really looking for its existence. What should it be doing apart from enlargement? The big issue was either NATO goes out of area or it goes out of business. And this going out of area, in fact, meant that NATO became involved in defeating terrorism with the lead of the United States in Afghanistan, in an operation in Afghanistan. So let me now just reflect on Latvia's 20 years in the alliance. And I think as we were going into NATO, it was quite clear that we had to think about what will be our contribution to the alliance. This is always an issue for those member states coming in, those new members. They have to show that they can contribute something, and I think we were able to show this by actually agreeing to engage in military operations that were ongoing in the Balkans at the time. Even before we had joined the alliance, our soldiers were serving with other NATO troops. And at the end of the day, after 9/11 and after NATO made a decision to set up the operation in Afghanistan, and pre the Afghanistan operation, there was also the Coalition of the Willing, as it was called, by the United States, with the operation in Iraq. So Latvian soldiers served in both of these operations. And when I unexpectedly became Minister of Defense in 2009, the NATO operation in I4 in Afghanistan was ongoing. And ultimately, I think one of my most difficult parts of serving as minister was to acknowledge the ultimate sacrifice that our soldiers made when they were killed in action in serving in Afghanistan. And I think today, when we look back at this, we have to remember that this has actually been a very important contribution that not only Latvia, but many of the other European countries made in support of our NATO partner, the United States of America. So let's not forget that during that period, the United States was supported very much by Europe. The contribution is not necessarily always in the terms of finance, but it's in terms of this dealing with the practical side of defending the values of the alliance. So perhaps just another illustration of how NATO has adapted vis-a-vis Latvia and how Latvia has witnessed the changes is the realization after the, or in parallel in many ways, with the operations out of area, was the realization after 2014 and the start of Russia's war against Ukraine, the illegal annexation of Crimea. There was a sudden realization that NATO had to move from its focus on out-of-area operations to focusing very much on the core principle of the alliance, and that is the collective defense of its member states. And so because of that, there were decisions made by NATO allies that they would introduce into the frontline states, or the eastern flank as it was referred to, of the alliance, an enhanced forward presence of different NATO countries. It was decided that for Estonia, the United Kingdom would take a lead role in establishing this battalion. In Latvia, as the State Secretary mentioned, Canada has taken over this lead role. And in Lithuania, the lead role was taken on by Germany. In Poland, the lead role was taken on by the United States of America. Latvia, out of the three, has shown that we have been able to integrate a large number of different NATO allies into this NATO presence. And at the moment, as this presence is being built up and changed from what was called a tripwire presence into being a presence that will defend our country from the first minute and from the first centimetre. As that's happening, we see that the forces at the moment are building up, and currently we have something like 4,000 Allied troops already present in Latvia. So, we very much highly appreciate this solidarity which is led by our Canadian colleagues, together with Spain, Italy, Poland, Slovenia, and various other NATO allies being with us to really enforce and support us in this very important collective defence, essential part of the alliance. So I think on that note, perhaps I will close and leave colleagues to perhaps discuss the future direction of NATO, which is the other part that I was going to discuss, but perhaps I'll leave it at that. Sandis, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you so much. Former minister, former ambassador to NATO, now advising the defense minister. You mentioned, I think, one important thing, coalition of the willing, which in my young years I thought that all NATO allies are the same, right? But there was also the coalition of unwilling at some point. Therefore, my question to Petr Lunak, Deputy Head of Engagement Section at NATO Public Diplomacy, how united is the alliance with the threat perception, with emerging challenges, and how to address them? So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation to Riga. Also, I'm glad that my division has been able to contribute to this important event, not only by sending me as a speaker, but also supporting the event per se. By the way, I'm of Czech nationality, so I feel very much, my country was, part of the first post-Cold War enlargement. NATO has been enlarging ever since 1952-53, with Greece and Turkey. But in fact, to me, for my generation, and I think for your generation as well, or at least for most of you, who I see in the audience, it's important to see the historical sort of consequences of the first Cold War enlargement, which was not a given, frankly. In the early 1990s, there was no. In fact, the NATO NATO enlargement was in fact the idea that came from the east. It was not something that was triggered by the alliance itself. It was us, the East Europeans, newly liberated democracies, knocking on NATO's door and saying, we want to be in. We do not want to be in no man's land. And I think it took imagination, I think, comparable to what Western leaders went through in the immediate post Second World War period, because without that bold decision actually to set up the Brussels Pact in 1948, setting the alliance or signing the Washington Treaty in 1949, turning or transforming, as has been mentioned, a political commitment in the Washington Treaty into a working organization in response to the aggression on the Korean Peninsula. I think it would have been unimaginable to have the kind of security system we have now in Europe. And in fact, it is a unique system. You cannot see that kind of sort of architecture in any part of the world. Look at what happened of ANZUS, of other efforts to set up that kind of multilateral or security organization. It's only in Europe that we have the pleasure and good luck to have that architecture. As has been said, NATO owes its existence to the fact that it's been always able to adapt itself to the world that's been changing. It was set up as a political commitment by the United States and Canada. Let's not forget, to help to deliver on Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. Then, in 1950, the decision was taken to turn that political commitment into a political military organization. Then later on, actually, it also adapted to what we call European détente. With the Hamel report, NATO actually took on more political role in being in the lead in new circumstances. This is all important, and nobody in their right mind can question sort of military value and defense value of NATO. But I think there is one thing that is very often underestimated, and that I would call soft power of NATO. In fact, and that brings me back to your question, like-minded, NATO is nowadays an alliance of 32 like-minded but not necessarily same-minded nations. This is absolutely normal. We are different countries, we have different cultures, different backgrounds, and so on and so forth. But what makes NATO, a democratic alliance, is that it's a expression of solidarity and commitment to each other, despite our differences, despite our different backgrounds and different viewpoints, to actually come to a conclusion and take action. And that, I think, that soft power was one of the reasons, in addition to hard power, for our countries to actually become part of NATO, because our previous experience from being, either part of the Soviet Union, as unfortunately happened to Latvia, or our countries, Poland and Czechoslovakia, being part of the Warsaw Pact, was very different. The Warsaw Pact. One of the reasons that the Warsaw Pact did not survive the end of the war of the Cold War was precisely because there was no soft power. And once the hard power was gone, the organization was gone. So I think I apologize for going back into that history, but I think 75 years. I think we need to make that or make tribute to those 3/4 of a century where our countries, my country has been. In fact, it's been also 25 years since Czechia. Poland and Hungary joined, 20 years since Latvia, and the other magnificent seven, we used to call them, in 2004 joined. Now, I think I've been talking about history way too long, but I will now turn to the past decade, which I think is very important, to see again how NATO adapted. The world around us has changed, and so has NATO. We have the largest land war in Europe since the end of the Second World War. We have great power competition, disruptive technologies. The world around us has changed, and so has NATO. In fact, if you look at what the alliance is about today, it's totally unimaginable. Only 10 or 15 years ago, we now have tens of thousands of troops, for the first time in history, actually deployed on the eastern flank, as has been already mentioned. We have more than 500,000 combat-ready troops on high readiness. We are involved in NATO has grown stronger, but also larger. We now have at the end of the Cold War, NATO had 16 members. We now have 32 members, twice as many. In fact, Finland and Sweden joined in particular precisely in response to Russia's invasion. We have also added new operational domains to NATO's activities, to traditionally land and sea. We now have cyberspace and space itself. So NATO has grown not only stronger but also larger, which is really important. It is sometimes a challenge because it's slightly difficult to make slightly different to make a decision at 16 and 32. But I think it still works. Now let me make 4 or 5 points. As far as the lessons learned, I think from the past decade are concerned. I think 4 or 5. I will not be long, but the first one is I think that you cannot get, and I don't need to convince the Latvians here in the room, you cannot have security on the cheap. Security is not something that you can get for free. You need to invest. NATO countries made a solemn pledge in 2014 to actually spend at least 2% of GDP on defense. We now are in a situation when 23 countries, including Latvia, I'm proud to say my own country, including Poland, are at that. That's the good news. The bad news is that 23 is not 32. first, and second, that 2% may not be enough for the future. We are not putting any new figure out, but I think it's time has come to actually look beyond 2% and see how much is enough. This is not a new debate in the NATO context. In fact, since not necessarily since day one, but since day two in NATO, there was always a pressure from the other sides from the other side of the Atlantic to spend more. Remember, the so-called Lisbon goals in 1952, to set up I don't know how many divisions it was, but it never came to pass. Secretary of Defense McNamara in the 60s being always frustrated with Europeans not providing enough to provide enough conventionally equipped military forces. But again, this is important. We need to make sure that we have the kind of forces and money that we need. The second lesson learned would be that freedom is more important than free trade. I think we need to come to grips with the fact that every economic decision has security consequences. I think we have been our leaders had been at times rather negligent, creating dependencies on energy resources just for the sake of getting cheap energy and cheap resources, to actually disregard or turn the blind eye onto security needs. We made that mistake with Russia. We should not make that mistake with China, frankly. I think this is very important, and we need to keep that in mind. In fact, China, as we said very clearly in the strategic concept, is China's coercive policies are a challenge to our security. China is a systemic challenge to us. It also, at the Washington summit, we I think call a spade, basically labeling China a decisive enabler, of Russia's effort, Russia's war in Ukraine. I think that's exactly what should have been said. Third is that more our task as NATO is not to provoke war. Our task is to actually to secure peace. More weapons for Ukraine means a better prospect for Ukraine ultimately. We are not making our illusions that by providing what Ukraine needs, we will change Mr. Putin's intentions as far as Ukraine is concerned. What we however hope to do, and we will be doing, is to change his calculus. That in fact, that when and if the Ukrainian leadership decides that time has come for negotiations, then in fact, it negotiates from the position of strength. And frankly, I think we have said very clearly that Ukraine's future is in NATO when allies agree that conditions have been met. But I think it's unfinished business for NATO, frankly. And again, coming back to historical parallels, I think we can probably and this is I'm not speaking on behalf of NATO, but I think the Ukrainian question is probably what the German question was during the Cold War for NATO and for the Western alliance writ large. My fourth point, last but one, I know that I've been talking way too long, but please bear with me, is that military power has its limits. I think we saw, we got involved in Afghanistan, as has been mentioned, for good reasons. But I think at a certain point we took upon ourselves a task bigger than we could have sort of digested or managed. And that shows us that we have to be very careful, selective as to to what extent we get involved in situations like that. We simply, we got involved in an effort to build a democracy and functioning sort of, also almost Western style, system in Afghanistan, and it didn't work out. So I think we have to be also mindful of limits of military power. And my last point is that let's not take transatlantic bond for granted. It's something that needs to be cultivated as every single generation of leaders, not only in America or in North America, but also in Europe. The worst scenario would have been if our North American allies actually decided to go it alone. It would have been just as bad if Europeans decided to go it alone. I think we need to do better to understand each other, because this is a great investment in our security. It is also important in terms of what I called soft power. Because ultimately, NATO is not a security contract where you pay. You need to invest, absolutely, but it's not like a security contract where either you pay your dues and you have a security guarantees, or you don't and you don't. I think this is very important also to keep in mind. I'll stop here, and of course I'm ready to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petr Lunak, for your ideas. I think it is really important to support Ukraine to make sure that we stop the history man, the KGB guy. Otherwise, the history will go mad and we will be left with few choices, all bad. And the Baltic states have done a tremendous job already investing in indigenous, like military industry, like Patria, Frankenberg technologies, Latvian mobile telephone operator building 5G capabilities to make sure our communications are secure, and other things. At Washington NATO summit, recent one, the Polish minister Radosław Sikorski mentioned one important thing. It doesn't matter what are the conditions, Poland will never become a servant of another country, and he meant Russia. I think it's an important point. Around the enlargement, the major decision makers or power centers were Berlin, Paris, and London. I think this power has shifted towards Warsaw. I think the Baltic states and also our Visegrad partners like the Czechs and Hungarians and Poles, who were really supporting us during the second time when the window to get into NATO was open for the Baltic states and the others. We will be always grateful for that. But Poland has become really the cornerstone for the eastern flank security, with its really responsible approach to the security and also its leadership. Dr. Adam Eberhardt, the Center for East European Studies, University of Warsaw. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Sandis, for having me here. Well, just a couple of remarks, mainly focusing on regional context as well as on Ukraine. But let me start with the first point, more about terminology. I think probably it is quite clear for all of you here in this venue, but it is something we should press on. So the round anniversary of NATO membership of our region is good time to stress that we are not newcomers to NATO anymore. And we are not new members of NATO, we are not new members of European Union anymore, because that kind of terminology, there is some hidden stigmatization behind it. There is some kind of outdated and inaccurate understanding of our role in NATO. No one has ever called Spain a new member of European Union back in 2006, after 20 years of their membership in European Union. So we should very much in the region, here in Latvia, in Czechia, in Poland, we should try to convince all our partners that we are not only the newcomers to NATO, but in the very fact we are the most important part of NATO security architecture, as we are defending the eastern flank of NATO, and at the same time we are working hard to integrate the Baltic Sea region after Finland and Sweden have finally joined alliance. So it was point number one. Point number two, it has already been mentioned by all of you. about defense spending. Yes, indeed, countries of our regions, like Latvia, like Poland, also Czechia, demonstrate their strong commitment to NATO collective security by getting to the threshold of 2%. In the very fact, Latvia has already spending 3% of GDP. Czechia is spending 2%, but there is a rapid growth from 1.2, if I'm not mistaken, several years ago. In case of Poland, we are spending around over 4%, 4.6% of our GDP is spent for military, and aspiration of the Polish government is to create one of the strongest European armies, as this is the time to focus on military capabilities in a serious way. And also, well, Latvia, despite its small economy, plays a crucial role on NATO eastern flank, contributing to regional security defense of our whole community. But when discussing our defense spending, we should not forget about Russia's defense spending. Russia is spending 6.5% of GDP on defense. If you take Russian budget spending, is like almost 40% is spent for security, both domestic and hard security and defense. It is a lot of money Russia is spending. Certainly, Russia is waging war against Ukraine, so this spending there is not very much of allocation of their military investment, but we should remember that European members of NATO should take defense spending seriously. It is certainly important because of United States situation, political context with President Trump on board. So, well, American administration and the future American administration expects Europe to do the burden sharing, and for good reason. We should do. Certainly, there are already some talks about, as Petr Lunak has already mentioned, discussion whether 2% is good or is not enough. Maybe we should discuss about 3% of our spending. It was also mentioned by Polish President Duda some time ago. I'm rather reluctant about being too ambitious, because what we need the most is not just defense spending, but it is also that we should cherish our unity. And if our goals are too ambitious, it may end up with a very difficult discussion with some Western European countries, and the result might be counterproductive, and that could result in deepening tensions in transatlantic relations, especially with new Trump administration. One thing which should be mentioned, I think, clearly, when Russia waged war against Ukraine back in 2022, they were clear that the war is not just against Ukraine. We probably all remember a ultimatum that was presented by Russia to NATO and United States back in December 2021, when Russia has demanding reversing the consequences of NATO enlargement to our region. And any sign of weakness from the West in this regard would serve as an invitation for Russia to pursue further aggressive actions in our dimension. So we should be clear that we are not discussing European security architecture in a way that Putin and Lavrov would love to do. When it comes to war in Ukraine, I'm not very much convinced that we will see end of the war in the coming year, because it is not war over territory. There is no land for peace scenario here. It is a war of attrition, and Russian goal is to destroy Ukrainian statehood. And we should remember that any willingness of NATO states of Western community to offer territorial concessions would not necessarily end the war, but it would Russia even more aggressive. Now, nothing provokes Putin more than our willingness and our willingness to seek compromise. Compromise is something he does not understand in a proper way. So it is something we should keep in mind. And also, when I try to observe the internal situation in Russia, it looks like, well, despite all costs of the war, the ongoing process of the modernization of Russia, one should acknowledge also that Russia has already adapted to the wartime economy, wartime social mobilization, and in the very fact it is hard to envisage a Russia of Putin coming back to a peaceful track. So we are in a process of a long war of attrition, and a NATO should be ready to work out a long strategy on how to support Ukraine, how to support our military capacities in a way that we are not the weakest chain of this difficult situation. Well, no time to discuss security guarantees, but it is something that we should work out when discussing a future end of war between Russia and Ukraine. If we are not able to offer any kind of security guarantees for Ukraine, I'm not referring to what type of security guarantees it should be, whether it should be full NATO membership or it should be one-sided US guarantees, I don't know, but there is a huge risk that an truce and a peace will be just a short technical stop, and Russia will regroup, rearm, and strike back again. So this is something we should keep in mind, and we should also try to pass this message to new US administration with two additional points. One point is President Trump should not commit a mistake President Biden has committed a few years ago when leaving Afghanistan. If United States decides to leave and to stop support for Ukraine, it will be perceived as the weakness of U.S. leadership. And one more thing, it is China. We should try to link a connection between a Russian aggression against Ukraine and revisionism of China. It is something, and if Russia prevails, if Russia is a upper side in a war against Ukraine, then it would be even more difficult to stop China in their attempts to reshape a global order. Thank you very much.
Instead of splitting transatlantic partners into new and old, we should focus on responsible, non-complacent collective security organization, and in this way we should present it also to the upcoming American administration. If Ukraine is forced to if Ukraine is subjugated by Russia, I think the consequences will be terrible for Europe and the United States, and we have to pass this message really quickly to the United States or to those European countries who show signs of complacency when it comes to the security affairs and also supporting Ukraine on time and do not holding the supplies hostage to political decisions. I would like to open for questions. We have a couple of minutes left. So please raise your hand and present yourself.
I'm Juris Martins. I'm member of Progressive and I study at the Riga Graduate School of Law and Diplomacy. My question is much broader. Looking at the list of panelists in both discussions, I pretty much see that that's male-dominated. And when I look more broadly, our structures, when we talk about defense and security, and this political discussion is led mostly by men, and there's serious non-representation of women and genderqueer people. And in this sense, when you look into the future, should we try to address it, this issue, maybe through quotas or other mechanism? Because security is not only a question for the men, it's also for the whole society. Thank you.
I think it's a really good question, and I think these experts were selected by great ladies from the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. And if you look at the Ukrainian military, I mean, there is substantial share of women leading the security affairs. But who would like to address this one?
Well, of course, it's an important question, and I think that for the Progressive Party, which Juris is a member of, this is an important issue, and it's also being addressed by the Minister of Defence, in as much as the fact that we have just recently reintroduced conscription. You know, there is a debate going on in Latvia about the importance of having women being conscripted into the armed forces. So it's an issue that is being addressed, fairly prominently within the Ministry of Defence. So that was my comment on that. I just wanted to go back a little bit to one of the comments that you made about, and this is referring to our joining the alliance, because I think it's right to say that it was never a foregone conclusion, that we, Latvia, would join NATO. I was our representative at NATO at the time, and there was the whole issue of whether there was the concern about Russia's having a voice but not a veto in NATO. There was also the issue about popular support within society, within Latvia. We had to, one of the reasons that the Latvian Transatlantic Association was set up was, in fact, to help get the support from society for our joining NATO, because there, at that time, there were parallels with what's happening in Georgia today in Latvia. In the late 1990s, the political situation was not so clear. There were people, even in this room here, who were advocating against Latvia going into the European Union and NATO. They would prefer that we had stayed with within the grey zone of the Russian sphere of influence. So, in fact, it was only through a big push, a combination, that we were able to, and the support of the female members of Latvian society as well, the whole of Latvian society supporting our joining NATO.
If I may, just respond to that question on the similar lines. Diversity is a very important issue. The fact that it's for men, on this panel, I think it's sheer coincidence. I was last week at a conference. There was a panel of 5 women. So I think there is nothing you should not read too much into it. But just more specifically, diversity is a very important issue. Actually, we have a special representative in NATO on women, peace and security, as a broader issue of human security. The number 2 in NATO nowadays is a lady. Radmila Šekerinska, former defense minister of North Macedonia, is now number 2 in NATO. So I think really this is something that is high on the agenda, and I think this is paid due attention to. But let me just and I'm sorry to sort of that we are sort of reacting to each other, but I think there's one important point also in the context of sort of one of many resets with Russia. We always refer to reset with Russia after the Georgia crisis, but actually there had been many more resets before. There was one after Kosovo. There was one after 9/11, and in fact, I had the impression that Putin expected that for being sort of constructive and showing his human face after 9/11, remember he offered support to the United States. Russia interrupted military exercises just ongoing during the while the terrorist acts were committed. That he expected to get in return that he will have a veto on certain NATO's policies, and one of them was NATO enlargement. In fact, he expected that he would be able to prevent the second post-Cold War enlargement from happening. Thank God it didn't happen. And I think, again, tribute to our leaders. It was never on the agenda, by the way. It was never on the table. But I think it was very important to actually make sure that this kind of transactional approach that we support you on that, and you will refrain from your policies didn't take hold in NATO's NATO's approach to what I think is unfinished business, because enlarging NATO is indeed part of sort of making unfinished business less unfinished. Thank you.
Thank you. No resets as a ways of appeasing Russia, right? Yeah. Any words?
One sentence, Ukraine is under attack not because of their NATO aspirations, but only because they have not managed to join NATO before.
Okay, we have a time for one more question here.
I thank you for an interesting discussion. And my name is Katrina. I study international relations at Riga Security University. And my question would be: so, as we all are aware of Russia's and North Korea's close ties, and in your opinion, how this partnership could evolve further regarding Ukraine's war? Thank you.
My name is Sergei Potapkins. I'm a researcher of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. So the countries of NATO eastern flank already reached more than 3% of their spendings, and Poland 4.8%. But I have a very short question. Do we understand how much, how big part of this budget should we spend for Ukraine military support, and how much we should invest in our defense capacity here in the Baltic States and Eastern flank?
So one more like geopolitical, geostrategic, close links between North Korea and Russia. North Koreans being in Russia already, so it's like already in the same bed. And the other about the military spending, how much to Ukraine and how much to Latvia. I think this goes to Defense Ministry, right?
Yeah, I can answer the second question first of all, because as we recall, after the Vilnius summit of NATO, there was a G7 meeting with the disappointment of President Zelensky at not being invited to join NATO, and there was an agreement that there would be arrangements made to support Ukraine by the G7 countries, giving bilateral agreements, signing bilateral agreements with Ukraine. This was actually expanded, and so Latvia, probably with many other countries, we signed an agreement with Ukraine to that we would give support of 0.25 of GDP to support for Ukraine. And this essentially means around 10% of the Latvian defense budget. And we're doing that in real terms, apart from leading the with the United Kingdom, the drone coalition in support of Ukraine. We're also providing other needed military equipment and support to our Ukrainians. On the question of North Korea, of course, yes, I think it's a sign of desperation of Russia bringing in soldiers to fight in Europe in Russia's war against Ukraine. It's a sign of desperation. And the other sign in which Russia is actually losing its global influence occurred just these last few days, when we saw that Russia was unable to continue to support the brutal authoritarian regime in Syria of Assad, was just left on the sidelines. So their global influence is actually reducing. And we see that in Syria, which is very important, they may even lose their naval base in Syria, which is crucial for their reach in the Mediterranean. So let's not forget, let's not overestimate the strength of Russia, but at the same time we do, and NATO acknowledges that Russia is the most important threat to the alliance at the moment?
Thank you very much. So the 0.2% initiative Latvia has raised the benchmark a little bit came from Estonian Defense Ministry and is embraced by many allies willing to support Ukraine. About North Korea's sign of weakness or the closer partnership between many authoritarian countries, Petr Lunak?
Very little to add. Perhaps, I think first of all, the decision to actually use, the North Koreans are doing it obviously for money and technology. That's their motivation. But I think it's important also to take into consideration that Mr. Putin has crossed every single red line except for use of nuclear weapons. And I think, honestly, we are sometimes worrying too much about his red lines. I think, what we need to do is to make sure that somehow that Ukraine has what she needs for its existential war, which I think, frankly, is also existential is not only existential for Ukraine, but I think it will determine in many ways the future of our alliance. I think in many ways, and I'm repeating myself, the Ukrainian question is probably what the German question was during the Cold War. Who could have, for example, somehow, let or give up the security of the Federal Republic of Germany, and the situation are different. I'm aware of that, but would have been probably the end of the Western alliance. And I'm just wondering to what extent, this is my private and personal view as a historian, whether the result of the outcome of the conflict, of the incredible sort of invasion by Russia into Ukraine is not what the German question was during the Cold War. Thank you.
Short remarks, Dr. Eberhardt?
Yes. Well, I think North Korean soldiers as well as Iranian drones is something that clearly shows us the very nature of the war. It is a war against Western world, and it should be used by us as an argument when discussing engagement of United States in this war. It's a very important question about how to support our military and to how to support Ukraine at one time. Well, it is a huge problem for Poland today. We have donated really a lot. According to our data, Poland has donated around 5% of our GDP in the last 5 years altogether. Most of it was a social support for Ukrainians coming to Poland, but much of it was also military assistance. Of the nearly 800 tanks Ukraine has received, over 350 tanks were provided by Poland, including Leopards and T-72s. Today, Polish government is saying we are not having military equipment to pass it to Ukraine anymore. There is a discussion, for instance, about fighter jets. Poland was the first country to offer Ukraine a MiG-29 fighter jets. We have passed most of them, but we still kept a few fighter jets for ourselves, and the position of the government, we will be happy to give it to Ukraine just after we get F-35 we have bought, but we have not got them from United States yet. So it is really a problem. It is a problem. A huge problem is ammunition. There was a European Union attempt, to have ammunition production of 1 million units in 2024. What was the final result? What is the final result? Half of it?
300. The result is there's no time for a timeout, but we are really running out of time.
Yeah, no equipment, no time.
Shortage of everything.
It is a problem, yeah.
But there are positive trends. We can see the indigenous military industry surging. We can see many European countries being responsible about the defense. What we see is some countries holding their military supplies to Ukraine hostage. So the eastern flank countries especially have to invest their efforts to make the Europe is unified in its effort to support Ukraine. Otherwise, Europe will never be able to rebuild its security architecture, and I think it's also for the benefit of Europe. Our security, freedom, free trade builds on security. If we have secure Europe and this is also a place for safe investment and cooperation with Europe and other willing partners who are ready to embrace the same values, hopefully Syria in the future and also the other countries. On this note, I would like to close this discussion and send our speakers a round of applause. Thank you very much.